Hereby call to order the June 2nd meeting for the Policy and Innovation Committee. We do not have any individuals at this time participating remotely. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to have everyone stand and join me in the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so very much. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Thank you. Good morning. Director Andreatta,
I'm here.
Chapdelaine,
Here.
Gallardo absent, Kennedy absent, McCully. Here. Rodriguez absent, Schaefer absent, Soon absent, Veerkamp.
Here.
Vice Chair Vega. She is online observing today.
Here.
Thank you.
I hope you feel better.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Chair Dowden Calvillo.
I am present.
Thank you.
Because our vice chair is not going to be participating as an active member of the committee, we do not yet have a quorum for the purposes of conducting business, but we will convene as a committee of the committee, which will allow us to obtain public comment and also to hear informational items only. So at this time, Madam Clerk, are there any public comments?
There's no public comments.
Okay, we'll move along to disclosures, even though we're not going to take action. Are there any committee members that need to disclose any potential conflicts of interest pursuant to the Levine Act?
No.
All right, great. We're going to move right along over to item number 4. This is our advocacy update, and we'll receive an update on state and federal advocacy activities. Who's going to start that? Sorry, we're taking it now, early. So we're ready for your advocacy.
Say you're here. Oh, Tuesday. Oh, Renee DeViroki.
Hmm?
Wait, sorry, what?
So we're ready. Who's going to provide us with the advocacy update?
Oh, I'm going to kick it off. All right. Good morning, Renee
Yes.
DeViroki, part of your government affairs team. So we're going to do a little bit more of a detailed update than we did last time. So we're going to start off with the state update, hear a little bit about what's happening with May Revise, and then some other bills of interest. Then we'll kick it over to Jason, who will talk about the federal side. We'll hear about reauthorization, reconciliation, what's going along with the 2026 federal budget. This committee doesn't get back together until September, so we're going to kind of do a little focus on what's happening over the summer, since there's a fair amount of activity that we're anticipating, and then kind of a quick look back about what happened in May, because that's when a lot of this budget information came back. With that, I'm going to ask Chris to come up and give our update.
And sorry, we're out of order, but because we didn't have a quorum, we do have Supervisor Kennedy present. Does that give us a quorum, Madam Clerk?
Yes, we have, excuse me. Yes, we have a quorum.
Okay, so we'll note for the record that Supervisor Kennedy is present. We now have a quorum, but we are. So Supervisor, we're actually going to hear the advocacy update first because we were convening as a committee of the committee without a quorum. Please proceed. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and members. Chris Lee here on behalf of Politico Group with an update on recent budget and legislative items. So first off, as included in your report, one of the most significant developments over the last month was the release of the governor's May revision. As you know, this is basically an opportunity for the state to update its revenue estimates for the coming fiscal year. And typically the May revise also includes new policy proposals, trailer bill language to implement proposals that are included in the budget, and then changes to appropriations. And so I'd say the most extensive and significant for SACOG item in the May revision was the governor's cap and trade extension proposal. So this was widely expected that there would be something on cap and trade in this budget. The January budget didn't have a specific proposal. It just talked about some high-level principles. And so what the governor's proposing now is essentially a status quo extension of the cap and trade program through 2045. As you recall, the current program is authorized through 2030. And he laid out two specific proposals for the use of those auction proceeds. So the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is the fund that receives all of the money from the allowances sold in the cap and trade auctions. And he has proposed a shift of $1.54 billion from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to backfill general fund support for CAL FIRE related to prevention, fire control, and forest resources management activities. Under the governor's proposal, this is an ongoing diversion that would increase to about $1.9 billion by fiscal year 28-29 and continue going forward. The other specific fiscal proposal related to the use of those auction proceeds is creating a floor essentially for the high-speed rail program. Currently receives 25% of ongoing GGRF revenue, and the governor's proposal would say this needs to be at least $1 billion annually going forward to provide some certainty for that project. And so I think the key issue here, and then as you also know, and as is highlighted in the memo, in addition to the 25% for the high-speed rail project, there's 20% continuously appropriated ongoing for the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. This region has received a lot of grant funding from that program. 10% for the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, 5% for Low Carbon Transit Operations Program. So that program is distributed by formula to transit operators in the region and around the state, and then 5% ongoing for safe and affordable drinking water programs. So the key question is really, and the administration is arguing in budget committees, that their proposal doesn't touch those ongoing continuously appropriated pots, right? Because those are percentages of what's remaining. But the question is, what will actually realistically be available with a diversion as big as 1.5 billion and increasing in ongoing for CAL FIRE. And so if you look at the last several fiscal years, since the program was last extended in 2017, the GGRF revenues have ranged from about $2.1 billion to $5.1 billion. So there's a real question of what will the impacts of this diversion be on those programs that support transit, housing, and other related purposes ongoing. The other piece of the budget, which wasn't initially clear in the write-up, and so we've sent your staff an update of this description, was the multi-year agreement that the legislature and the governor reached on the distribution of the non-continuously appropriated, so the discretionary cap and trade auction proceeds revenue. And so that represents, it's about $6 billion over the next 4 years. And essentially they're kind of putting this all back into negotiations. And so there's been a lot of advocacy, particularly by some of the large regions in the state, by transit operators, because of the significant amount of SB 125 Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program. So that's the formulaic funding that was allocated to regions to distribute to transit operators around the state. And then the Zero Emissions Transit Capital Program, which is funding that was initially available for things like electrification, buying EV buses, things of that nature. But SB 125 allocated that money from the GGRF and said this funding can also be used to backfill transit capital needs. So we're seeing some very heavy-duty lobbying from the transit folks and from regions around the state to push back on this sort of rescission of funds that were sort of pre-committed through SB 125, as well as the ongoing impacts to the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program, and then with the housing advocates, a big focus on the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Grant Program. So at this point, I think it's a little unclear where we will see this go. I think the fact that the budget committees, to me, didn't seem to completely shut down the idea of that CAL FIRE backfill. We're in a broader budget situation where, the governor's solving for about a $12 billion deficit. Pending the federal budget resolution, we might see much more significant cuts, particularly to safety net programs that have a lot of state fiscal participation. And so I think that shift is kind of a key thing. Do they come up with another $1.5 billion in budget solutions, or do they accept a temporary shift from GGRF And then what does that mean for the timing of a broader reauthorization? Because with federal regulatory and political headwinds and with the pending expiration of the current authorization, we saw the last greenhouse gas reduction fund deposits from the cap and trade auction much lower than they've been in prior quarters. So a lot of moving parts here, but a significant amount of money on the line. So I'll pause there. I think that's kind of the most significant item that was included in budget. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the housing related proposals and then can move on to the bills, but figure there might be some questions about the cap and trade.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to confirm, you said that he's proposing status quo to 2035?
2045.
45,
Yep.
okay, I was going to say a 5 year is not much. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much. For those that arrived late, we did reconvene, we actually convened as a committee of the committee because we did not have a quorum. And so we are now on the advocacy update, obviously. I'd like to see if there are any questions on the information that's been presented thus far. All right, thank you very much. You can.
Chair Davin, can I just connect the dots for the committee? Because as you all know, we have been working really hard on Green Means Go over the last 4 years. We got that 30+ million from the state of California back in 2021. It was threatened with a 50% cut last year. We rallied as a region and got that money reinstalled in the budget. Well, we don't know, right? And as Chris is saying, a lot of uncertainty. We do think this is one of the better places to be looking for something that actually can meet the state's climate goals, meet our local economic development goals, and fund Green Means Go. So no promises, right? But this is one of these places in a budget, right, that is tough, that has been impacted by the May revise and fewer revenues and the FAIR plan and the LA fires. We're not giving up on Green Means Go. And this is going to be one place we're going to work really hard to try to see if we can get some funding from the state to help you all locally.
Thank you. I appreciate that because that is a very important program for all of us, of course. Thank you, James. All right, thank you.
And I'll move on briefly, talk about not a lot of housing funding in the budget. As has been reported a lot in the press, the governor did not include another $1 billion of basically one-time funding for homelessness in the homeless housing and assistance program, something that big cities and counties are fighting really hard for in the budget. There's some very small revisions of unexpended general fund in housing, but in general, there's no new housing funding in this budget. And so I think that's something that's also, the Assembly prioritized that in their initial budget conversations. The chair of the Assembly Housing Committee submitted a budget letter with about 30 other colleagues outlining specific areas for investment, including, as James was just discussing, REAP funding. And so this will be an area of discussion. I think the bigger question is what's the deficit situation and how are folks going to be preparing for any potential broader federal cuts? I think in a bit of a nod to the fact that there was no new housing funding in the budget, the governor did endorse the bond bills that are being considered. There's two $10 billion housing bonds. The one on the Senate side is sponsored by SACOG delegation member Senator Cabaldon, and the one on the Assembly side is sponsored by the Appropriations Chair and former Housing Chair Buffy Wicks. So they're approximately similar, just have a slightly different mix of programs that are funded. And the governor called for basically, yes, send me a housing bond, but also can we broaden it to include other types of infrastructure? So we also think there's good opportunities there to look at the alignment with the REAP program, which is funded Green Means Go in the SACOG region. And then one of the areas where there's a lot of policy related discussion is the governor's climate aligned housing policy reforms. So he has trailer bill language that's implementing, a broader approach to streamlining housing. There's some pretty narrow stuff like exempting the exception in the Permit Streamlining Act for the Coastal Commission, some changes to the it's a judicial streamlining program that was created by Senator Atkins, allowing housing projects to get streamlined administrative and judicial review under CEQA. And then one of the proposals that we've been engaging on closely on behalf of SACOG is a proposal by the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation to develop basically a VMT mitigation banking program that would happen statewide. One of the issues with the way that the trailer bill is constructed is that the definitions of transit are pretty tight. And so given that this region, compared to maybe the Bay Area or some of the other more urban regions of the state, doesn't have as much qualifying transit, we're worried about basically mitigation funding potentially leaving the region. So we've been arguing for a much broader definition of transit and low vehicle travel areas to make sure that if projects in the SACOG region are paying into mitigation funding because of the vehicle miles traveled, the induced driving that happens from the project, that it can support investments in housing and related infrastructure to mitigate VMT locally. And so good reception from the administration and from the budget committees on that so far, but a pretty significant policy proposal there. As you recall, we've discussed it, I think, in the legislative reports previously. The Assembly has a sort of similar bill that was just advanced from the Assembly over to the Senate side. So a little bit unclear whether this will advance through trailer bill, through the budget process, or if the legislature will, continue to go through the policy committee process, perhaps with an expedited schedule there. But we just wanted to make sure that anything that was proposed in this statewide framework doesn't disadvantage projects in the SACOG region and make sure that mitigation funding can support important goals, including Green Means Go, including affordable housing and related infrastructure in this specific region. Last thing I'll say on the policy proposals is the governor blessed basically two CEQA bills, so AB 609 by Assemblymember Wicks and SB 607 by Senator Wiener. What AB 609 does is it takes the existing infill exemptions. So cities have one, it's a categorical exemption subject to a lot of exceptions that can be exploited in litigation. And the counties have one, but it's pretty narrow. And so what AB 609, there's too many 60 bills this year, does is it creates a statutory exemption for infill that applies both in urban unincorporated areas, so really important for a county like Sacramento that has a lot of fully built out urban areas that just happen to be located in the unincorporated zone, and for infill areas within cities, and provides a pretty, I would say, airtight might be overstating it, but a pretty strong exemption to ensure that housing projects in infill locations aren't subject to CEQA lawsuits. SB 607 made a lot of other policy changes. It made changes to the fair argument standard, kind of the flipping it on its head in terms of what a lead agency has to find versus what a litigant might have to prove. And that bill passed out of the Senate Appropriations Committee, but was basically stripped of all of its substantive provisions and turned into an intent bill that said the Senate wanted to work with the Assembly and the governor to advance housing and affordability and infrastructure without imperiling environmental protections. The part of the amendments that they did not announce verbally during the the Appropriations Committee hearing was another intent statement that basically said, we don't want any CEQA streamlining for the Delta Tunnel, like for the Delta conveyance in that project, which I thought was an interesting dynamic given the broader conversation about the Delta project in the governor's budget and regulatory and statutory streamlining for that project. So unclear where those go. Again, I think it's a big question whether they will continue to move AB 609 through the policy process or put that into budget. But the governor, again, is asking for this regulatory streamlining for housing and for infrastructure, and we will see how it plays out. So I'll stop there with budget. I think on bills, we're facing basically the Friday, June 6th deadline for all the House of Origin bills to be passed over to the other side. Not terribly a lot other than 1244 that we've been working on much with SACOG, but SB 681, which makes changes to HCD's authority over approving RENA methodology, is something where we were working with CalCog to secure some guardrail amendments on that. Unfortunately, those were not taken in the Senate, so we'll be pushing for that on the Assembly side there. But I'm happy to answer any questions. There's a lot going on, and appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your report and also the written materials that were in our packet. Yes,
Yes.
Mr. Kennedy.
So, the bill that you said now makes it applicable for counties. You said it makes them so they're not subject to CEQA litigation, but does it actually change the CEQA process and streamlining?
Yeah, so it's an exemption, right? And I'll get myself in trouble trying to be the CEQA attorney up here, but the current exemption that's used in City World is created through the categorical exemption process, and it has exceptions like unusual circumstances and cumulative impacts, which are very often, pretty significant loopholes. There was a county-focused bill last year that is based on the categorical exemption, but it's in statute. So it has the exceptions kind of written into the law. And so what this bill would do would create a statutory exemption that has a lot fewer loopholes.
Okay.
And so it's pretty consistent with like the physical areas that are already eligible for streamlining. But I think the key benefit of this bill is that it's just going to make it a lot harder to bring litigation to say, hey, unusual circumstances applies, or we've had a lot of these infill projects and we're not thinking about the cumulative impacts to XYZ environmental factors. So I think it's a pretty good and pretty solid streamlining bill.
Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your report.
All right, we can transition over to the federal side. Jason, are you still there? There we go.
Absolutely, absolutely. Good afternoon, and I hope everyone is doing well. We've just ended a very long, I think, work session here for Congress, and actually they're back at it again this week. What I want to start with is in addition to the annual cap to cap trick, which you've gotten a report on from the team. We've had a handful of visits with SACOG staff here. It has been a very busy April and May. We have obviously Congress is going through transportation reauthorization, which is where I'll begin. And that is the process of filling out a 5-year policy as well as funding. The interesting thing about the federal government, as far as transportation policy and funding is concerned, is that it's really written every 5 years. And that policy and the funding that goes along with it doesn't really change, areas at least isn't supposed to. I should caveat all of that given the current state of politics with a little bit of an asterisk. But we are going into the final years of IIJA. And as we've talked about in previous meetings, there's a lot of questions in terms of what's the future of federal investment in transportation. May was busy because there was both a stakeholder portal that SACOG submitted to, as well as members of Congress had a May 30th deadline to submit their priorities to the House Transportation and the Senate Environmental Public Works Committees. So we have been working very closely with our delegation, not just Congressman Kiley and LaMalfa, who are both on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I should also note that Senator Padilla and Senator Schiff are also on the Senate Environment Public Works Committee as well, and the Senate companion to the House Transportation Committee. So we've been very working with those those offices as well as other members of the delegation. With the big question, of course, being is funding. Not only was IIJA important because it created so many new grants, but just the amount of money. So the big question becomes, will the next bill live up to IIJA in terms of transportation funding? And there's a lot of questions to be asked about that. And if it does, the second question is, will that money continue to go through competitive grants, or will it go back through the formulas? And there's certainly benefits and draws from each of the two issues. But what we're focused on is ensuring that if the money goes back through formulas, which we believe it will, that it's formulas that are one, beneficial to the state, California, and two, provides more money to local governments, keeping in mind that a lot of the reason why a lot of these competitive grant programs were created is because local governments outside of California really don't have a say in how transportation dollars are divided. California has a state law that SACOG, and all the other MPOs across the country control, a pretty significant portion of the federal formula money. That is not something other states share. So as we're sort of going through this process, we recognize that we are unique in California, but at the same time, what you have, other communities around the country want. So a large focus is making sure, again, that those dollars go first to programs like the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, where California certainly gets a larger share than other programs. And then second, the other dollars that come through some of the formula programs that are sub-allocated down to your region. We're also working on Green Means Go. One of the big issues that we are proposing and we're working with our delegation on is making sure that as we receive dollars, that they're flexible. One of the things that I've been working in DC for 25 years, and breaking down silos and making things easier to use is a common theme, but that is exactly what we're trying to do. That when project sponsors get money and they're digging up a road, they can also do preliminary work on water infrastructure, for example. So there's a variety of things that we're doing to make transportation dollars support some of the other issues that they deal with, housing, et cetera, included, which we think is to be a big help sort of the Green Means Go effort. The way reauthorization will work is, again, as I mentioned, they included the member stakeholder portal as well as the non-congressional stakeholder portal. We have submitted those. Congress will take the summer, for lack of better words, the committees to review those proposals. There were obviously several hundred submitted from across the country from a variety of different stakeholders. But they will review those and then towards the end of the summer begin to develop legislative texts, and we'll begin to develop what the next bill will look like. The intent and the hope is that the House committees, as well as possibly the Senate committees, will have what's known as a markup. We'll take committee action later in the fall or winter of 2025, with the hopes that by this time next year, we'll have passed a multi-year transportation authorization bill. That is the current timeline. So we will be spending a lot of the summer working with committees, working with committee staff, and trying to ensure that our priorities are included in reauthorization. I start with that, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention sort of what's happening in DC in general. The key to a transportation bill is that it would be done bipartisan. There is almost no way that Congress will be able to pass a transportation bill without the support of at least some Republicans or some Democrats. That is almost a certainty. We're seeing right now how tough it is for the speaker to keep Republicans in line, even on the top of their priorities, right? Certainly transportation, while I'm sure is an important thing, is not something that every Republican universally believes the federal government should be involved in. So this legislation will have to be bipartisan. One of the challenges to legislation being bipartisan is what's happening around DC and in general. And to say that right now is not a bipartisan moment in time would be a dramatic understatement. What we're seeing right now is House Republicans and Senate Republicans are trying to push through what the news and what the president has deferred to as his big, beautiful bill. And this is the reconciliation process. And effectively what reconciliation is a budgetary legislative process that allows Congress to pass funding for things outside of a filibuster. So only 50 votes in the Senate is needed. And that includes spending as well as tax policy. And what we're seeing in this legislation is almost every Republican priority trying to be squeezed into this quote unquote big beautiful bill somehow, some way. Obviously it's being done without Democratic input, and obviously many of the elements are controversial, including tinkering to Medicaid and other entitlements, as well as reducing spending for a variety of energy, environmental, and other social programs. So while this is happening, obviously, it ruffles feathers. And the way that they are putting together is certainly very challenging because the Republican Party is very diverse right now. And it's not even in many ways a parallel line. It's a little more of a globe in terms of the party itself. So it's a very long way of saying that certainly in the transportation bubble, we're working on a bipartisan bill. But surrounding that bubble is sort of an atmosphere of partisanship. And even in transportation spheres, where there is this continuing lingering threat of staff cuts, of reorganization of DOT, things that are being talked about privately and in some cases publicly, that are creating partisan headaches. So, that is the state where we're at. Is right now all parties are still working towards a transportation bill, and that is a positive thing. But certainly we have to keep an eye on over the next coming months the greater world of politics to see if there will be a desire to do a bipartisan bill. And there's a variety of reasons why each party may not want to participate or won't be able to participate in sort of that bipartisan process. But that said, the transportation bill does need to get extended, does need to be reauthorized. So at some point, Congress will have to come together, and really the work that is being done now lays the foundation for that, whether it's done in this Congress or the next. I mentioned reconciliation. For the most part, transportation is really not impacted in a lot of ways from reconciliation. Most of the savings and most of the impact related to transportation or to federal spending help happens elsewhere. There are a handful of programs within the IRA bill, the Neighborhood Equity and Access Program in particular, that would be rescinded, but that would be funds that are not yet obligated. So that is something that we are monitoring, but not overly concerned with at this point. And that leads us to just the general budget. At some point between now and the end of September, Congress needs to pass a budget. We were delayed in the sense that we literally just passed the FY25 budget little less than 2 months ago. Congress was on the verge of a shutdown then. The president has released over the weekend the full details of his plans. And to suggest that there was anything in there that would bridge the gap between what Democrats are willing to do and what Republicans want would not be correct. So it is very likely that as we get to the end of the fiscal year, we will be looking at some type of extension of existing appropriation budget law, and whether that is an extension that is weeks, days, months, or the full year is to be determined. A government shutdown is still on the table, as it always is. In these things, it seems to be that nuclear button that we get real close to pressing, and it's very possible that both sides will have a reason to want to press it. So we are obviously following the appropriation process. I know the committees are hard at work, but when we get back together in September, we will likely come back to a world where Congress is on the verge of either an extension of some time or at least the threat of a government shutdown. And we'll see how that plays out. Certainly a lot of time between now and September. But at this point, I would say there's really nothing that has changed politically that would make it easier to do a long-term appropriation bill, as we move forward. The final thing I'll say is there is discussion of codifying the DOGE cuts, as reported over the weekend. Elon Musk will be leaving DOGE, which really isn't a real thing, but it's talked about as such. But a lot of the cost savings and a lot of the things that they have identified, it's important to note that the money that is tied to those things hasn't officially been returned to the treasury. It hasn't ended. They effectively, the way I'll explain it is, if it's like if I had $1,000 in my bank account that was supposed to go to rent and I just never wrote to rent check, that money in theory is still there. I'm not able to save it because it's still in the account and it's dedicated for rent. It'll take an act of Congress, for lack of better words, for the money that has been pegged as those savings to really be truly savings, and to reduce the debt deficit or whatever purpose it will be. But there is push that this week the White House will put forward legislation that would then codify those savings, and it'll be very interesting to see what, if anything, comes out of that in relation to the transportation world. We have been reassured time and time again that transportation dollars are not at risk, and that there's only a handful of projects that are under review. But we remain skeptical, and for a reason in some cases. But we will see what comes from the rescission legislation, and then obviously that means, in effect, Congress validating a lot of the cuts that have been made and talked about in the media. And that's tougher to do when some of those cuts were led to the job loss of individuals in your district. So obviously Democrats are unlikely to support any of those cuts. It'll be interesting to see if vulnerable Republicans are going to be put on the spot to vote for cuts and approve cuts. That means, in some cases, thousands of their constituents being out of a job. But that is coming this week, supposedly, and we will continue to monitor that and update staff as it has any direct or indirect impact on SACOG. Let me stop there, Renee, and see if there's anything, any blanks that I can fill in, or if there's anything else you'd like me to cover.
Thank you very much. Directors, are there any questions thus far? Seems like there's a lot of status quo of just uneasiness and not knowing. So we just continue down that path.
The ball of dust is not cleared out. That's a fair assessment.
Yes, Dr. Gallego.
It does feel like California in particular is a bit of a target. Are you getting that vibe, or are we, that just the political things going on? It seems like we seem to be at the top of the list.
Certainly, there's no question. I don't think I think I'm accurately saying that certainly a lot of the cuts that are being made and a lot of things that are being done are in many ways targeted, and often targeted to blue areas, blue states. I don't think that's an opinion. I think there's stats that would back that up. So yes, I do think that there are, outside of transportation, certainly targeted, and even in some of the things that we have seen in the transportation world, you see there's more blue than red. If I were to, and the example I'll make is there were recently 7 university transportation centers that lost their contract, including UC Davis. And of the 7, 3 were from California: UC Davis, Minette Institute, and San Jose State, and then USC. And then the other 3 were from red states as well: 2 in New York, 1 in Maryland. The only red state one was the University of New Orleans, which is not exactly a dark red area. It's a dark red state, but a very dark blue part of the state. So I think it is accurate to say that not just the funding, but the policies are being targeted very much are more blue statish than they are, I think, red statish.
Thank you. Chair Soon, welcome. We had convened as a committee of the committee because we didn't have a quorum, and so we're just having the advocacy update, and just heard from our federal lobbyist on that end, and he was asking if there were any questions. So do you have any questions, or, I mean, just kind of put you on the spot because you arrived, but are there any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that. And thank you for the continued good work as we continue to go down this path of unknowing. And hopefully things will get a little bit more clear soon. So, all right, with that said, we've concluded our advocacy update. It is just an update, but there's no public comment, Madam Clerk, just to,
There's no public comment.
okay, great. Thank you very much. So let's move now to our consent calendar, and just wanted to give our directors an opportunity that arrived late to disclose any item that may have a conflict of interest pursuant to the Levine Act. Are there any conflicts from those that were late? Okay, great. We'll move on to the consent calendar. We have two items on consent: the approval of the May 12th meeting minutes and approve revisions to our accounting policies. Any questions or concerns with regards to the consent?
Madam Chair, on the May 12th minutes, it says that I was present, but I missed that meeting.
We'll get that corrected.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we'll go ahead and consider that correction to the minutes. Any further questions or concerns? Any public comment on the consent items, Madam Clerk?
There's no public comment.
All right, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended? To amend the
Move
minutes?
approval.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Do we need a voice? We can do a roll call vote or a voice vote.
We could do a voice vote.
Okay, those in favor? Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'll ask for abstention. So those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Those that would prefer to abstain?
Apologize. I attended that one. That was in there.
Okay.
Aye, sorry.
Too many meetings. Too many,
Yes,
too many meetings.
I remember the view.
All right, let's go ahead and show that that item has been adopted unanimously with no votes or abstentions. All right, moving on, under action, approve extension of legal services agreement. Eric, this is your item?
Yes, thank you. So back in 2022, the board put out an RFP for legal services. And so just for background, SACOG contracts for all of its legal services across 5 areas and has 3 different firms under contract. So the item before you today is to exercise an option to extend those contracts by an additional 2 years. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to the next slide. Try that again. Okay. Yeah, so again, back in the 2022 process, we had a number of ways where we engaged the board in that, including the final selection, but Director Kennedy was on one of those selection panels where we interviewed the finalist firms. We started these contracts in 2022, and as I mentioned, they were written with an optional 2-year extension, which is what's before you today. The primary change here really is just updating the rates. So some of the firms did not have increases built into their contracts. Others had increases, but they were all silent really on what happens after this option was exercised. And so in working with the firms, the rates here propose what we've, as staff have negotiated and are recommending to increase some of the rates. Just kind of starting at the top here. When we awarded to Best and Krieger to be our lead legal firm to provide general counsel services and other advice, we had a flat rate for all partners. Over the last 3 years, you've seen Mike Bauer as our general counsel and to be the lead present attorney that works for SACOG. And so their proposal, which we support, is to have a differentiated rate of $4.35 an hour for him and $4.15 for other partners with the firm, and then $4.35 for the litigation counsel should we need to use that with Best and Krieger. The other 2 firms we have, Sloan Sakai has focused on our contracts. So we've got these very complicated contracts we have to do to insert both the federal and state firms, and Osman Mufti with that firm has been our lead there for quite some time. And so this shows the rate of $3.85 that we've negotiated for that firm. And then finally, many of you may know Tina Thomas and Amy Higuera, who were with the Thomas Law Group. They were subsequently absorbed into Downey Brand. And just earlier this year, that group of lawyers split off and joined the firm of Stoll Reeves. And so that contract is a little bit different in that we're proposing a July 1 start date because they're now with a new firm, but they've matched the rate of of BBK here for the general counsel rate. The new change here, and again, this is a 2-year thing, so this is negotiated for the first year rate, and then for the second year, is that we're recommending that we have an inflation-based cap versus kind of dollar caps or dollar increases or percentage-based increases that varied across firms, to just use this consumer price index metric that we use for other purposes, including our employees agreement, our partner agreements with Placer and El Dorado, our TPAs, of using the CPI and then capping at 5% for any future increases. And just as I mentioned, right, we have some staggered dates here. So the first contract would go into effect in July for Stoll Reeves. And then the others are a bit staggered. Part of this is just so that we have continuity of service in case we went for an RFP in 2027 and there was some delay, that we have the Sloan Sakai contract lagging by a month. So they could provide services if we were out of contract with Best and Krieger. And just a little background as well on kind of how we've done on budget. So at the time we initiated these contracts in 2022, the board was interested in ensuring that there was kind of a limit where we'd come back to the board if we were, spending up to that limit. The good news is we've had been able to control our legal costs pretty substantially. And so you can kind of see the contract spend to date for each of the 3 firms and what those limits were back in 2022. So we're not recommending updating the limits. And you can see kind of combined across all 3 firms what we've budgeted, and then our actuals for the current year, and then what we're looking at for the budget that you all adopted last month. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I had to look through the paperwork because for some reason I was thinking that Sloan Sakai had our labor, because I know they are very dominant in the labor
They do labor as
world,
well,
but
yeah.
they're just on contracts. I did want to just say, I appreciate that we're just moving to extend these contracts. We're well within those budgetary limits, though, that we initially established, thinking that the contracts would expire. So that's interesting. It seems like we've really budgeted a lot for some of these services, and we just it wasn't needed to expend those funds. BBK, for example, I think we had budgeted 2 million, and we spent not even $1 million, just over $500,000. So just noted that on that. So I'd like to open this up for questions. Are there any questions from the directors? Okay, is there?
I have a question.
Yes,
So
Director Schaefer.
what are we showing as this current CPI?
So currently the CPI for December to December is 3.0%. So our labor agreement has that going to effect July 1. So that's measuring December of 23 to December of 24. And so for these contracts, we'd be looking at a change from December 24 to 25 that would go into effect in the fall of 2026.
And that would be, what would that rate be?
We don't know, right? So it would be somewhere between 0 and 5 with a 5% cap. And so, I mean, I think current rates from the state are in the 2.5% to 3% is kind of where they think we look at it quarterly, but we really just use that December marker so that we're consistent across.
We just reviewed this in Citrus Heights as 1.2.
Okay.
Great.
Hopefully it stays there. Yeah.
Hopefully, I just want to see if we're using the same numbers all.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
We
So
should be using the same number, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same page when my city tells me one thing and then come here.
there's
Wanna hear the same thing.
several different measures, but yeah, we use the statewide CPI, and we selected the month of December. Different groups use different months, and so you get variation from some seasonality.
That monthly rate can be different, and also they can look at regional rates as well, so it.
Yeah, April, we used April at our cities, 1.27. So,
It's what?
Still
1.27.
Oh, okay, wow.
hard to complain about that,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions or comments? Madam Clerk, any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
I'm going to bring it back to the committee. Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Oh, okay, we had 2
You can give it
seconds.
to Jill. That's
All
fine.
right, thank you very much. We can do a voice vote on this, Madam Clerk, or do we need a roll call?
A voice vote is fine.
Okay, those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Let the record show the motion has been adopted unanimously. All right, next item on the agenda is closed session, and let's see, I think I'm going to refer to our attorney on this really quickly.
And thank you, Chair. I'm on the screen here.
Yes.
So we may not need to go into closed session. I'll do a quick overview. The second item that's for potential initiation of
Sorry.
litigation.
Oh, excuse me, sorry. Go ahead, Mike. We
Okay,
just had to pull
there-
down a screen online. Thank you.
Okay, there's two items on there. The second item's for potential initiation of litigation. We actually don't need that item, so that can simply be tabled. The other item is to start the initiation of the executive director's performance evaluation. What we've traditionally done is we've taken the item initially to committee to make a determination on the process. After that, we'll let the board know that the process is starting, and then I'll confidentially provide materials to the board to do the performance evaluation. What I'd like to do is, if the committee would like to simply follow the process we've used in the past, I think I can just get direction to do that, and I'll update the board at the meeting next week, and we can move forward. If we'd like to discuss any details about the process and how we've done it in the past, I'd prefer to keep that in closed session, and we can move into closed session. So I'll turn it back to you, Chair, to
Okay.
gauge from the committee what our process will be.
Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate that. So without really any kind of deliberation, is there any concern with moving forward with the process that we've used in the past? Hearing none, that shall be the process that we will utilize, and therefore, unless there's objection, we will not have closed session. Hearing that there is no objection, there is no need for closed session. We have
Thank you.
one item on the receive and file, so we'll go ahead and receive and file that. Otherwise, there are no other matters pending before the committee. And so without further ado, and without objection, I will adjourn. Hearing none, that shall be the order. Thank you very much.